Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, Ghazala. I am so thankful you're here with me.
I'm grateful to be here today.
We're here reuniting a year after the transition of your father. And you were here a year ago explaining that experience and that vulnerability. And I thought it would be a great gift, and you offered that gift for the listeners to have a peek on what a year of living with grief would look like and honoring that. And before we dive in there, I want to ask you, how's your heart doing?
It hurts. Yeah. It hurts, and it's a part that I can push away, and probably and usually do push behind and push it aside. But today I'm bringing that part forward for this podcast because just a little while ago when you and I were doing our grounding together, we talked about intention, and I've been reflecting on my intention, my heart's desire for this. Like, what is the intent behind this podcast? And I really want to bring that part forward that's continues to struggle, that misses my dad all the time. And I want to bring that forward because I want to be a voice maybe for someone who might be going through something similar and not have words for it, or just for people to know they're not alone. Because I haven't really found in the people around me, even those who experience grief, someone who's been willing to uncover and bring out of hiding, this struggling part. So it feels lonely at times. It feels like I've been supporting that part. I've been holding it in my own ways, but I haven't really heard anything similar from, or, close from others. So that's the intent, is to bring that rawness to light. And I'm very aware of a resistance in me to do that as well. And this almost constant grounding that I'm doing as we speak. So I stay with that part so it doesn't go into hiding, because it's so easy to bring the intellect forward, the analyzing part that'll package it all neatly and nicely. And you want to protect, even the listeners from maybe what might come forward for them as they listen. So I'm speaking today from, you asked me, how's my heart? And I'm speaking from that place that feels broken. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the vulnerability, the sacredness of, like you just mentioned, it's so quick and easy for our intellectual mind to want to put on that performative, that mask to present out into the world. Yet to reveal our rawness, our humanity, our experiences, it takes work to do that.
Mm.
It really does. And, I'm very thankful and honored that you're willing to bless us with that. As my twin is trying to talk to me while we're in this space.
Yeah.
What would you describe I'm going to ask you this in 3 words, or 3 or 5 words. Describe what this year has been for you. Just take a moment to reflect.
Confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Struggle. Shift. So those would be my three words: confusing, struggle, and shifts.
Can you give some detail to why you chose those words and what that looks like?
So, like the whole year, I think even well before I would say before he died, he was sick for 5 months in the ICU. So I would say that experience started even then. You know, the confusion, the like a sense of feeling stunned, and I continue to. There's part of me that is that seems to be stuck in this stunned state of like, wow, you know, like that all of that is unfolded. You know, this sort of that what feels like a tsunami of suffering. And then there's a part of me that wants to minimize that and go, well, other people are suffering more and look at what else is happening in the world. Like there's this part that will do this comparison and try to, and I understand now as well that that part is those parts that try to do that are somehow trying to deal with the pain. And so they're looking for ways to minimize but really the confusion of and maybe the word, well, there is confusion. I'll come to the confusion part, but before the confusion is just this sort of feeling of like we usually use the word stunning when we describe something that takes our breath away, that's very majestically beautiful. This also feels like a stunning, but in the sense of the word stun, like freeze, like hold. And it's like it just stuns the nervous system to like, oh my gosh, like it's just such a contrast for me um from his like pre him getting sick. He's
Mm-hmm.
very independent, very you know self-sufficient and just a quiet presence that was always there that held us all together. He did it very quietly, very unassumingly, but he was the pillar that held our family together. Um, and for me in my life, he was just this constant presence. And I mean, and I knew that it wouldn't last forever, but I really didn't like I thought I would do these calculations in my head and I go, my grandmother lived into her 90s, his brothers, my uncles lived into their late 80s and he was in his sort of later 70s, and I'd be like, well, hopefully I've got another 10 years, and then so I'll be in my 50s maybe, and maybe by that point at that point I'll somehow have grown up enough to not need him the same way. There was just always this sort of thing I had, so I knew that like that would happen, but it was very unexpected. So when he got sick and the events, the way they unfolded, and him going and it going so quickly and so suddenly into like the severe, illness of ICU and all of that, like there was just no, like, it feels like there was no warning. And even though like people think, well, he was there for 5 months, like that isn't that warning enough for him to have died? It's like, not really. It still feels very shocking. And it continues to this moment. Like that's the part that feels really to me a bit confusing. Sometimes it's like there's a part that seems to be stuck in time and it's still completely like, whoa, I can't believe this has happened. Like every time that reality, like, it hits me several times a day, multiple times a day, that he's no longer here and I will never see him again and I'll never hear his voice again. And it's just as hard each time. You just get more used to hiding it. You learn to hide it better, but it still feels just as devastating. So, and that's the truth, so that moment never really, it's like, it's like as if I'm just hearing the news that he got sick. I'm just hearing the news that, or seeing him, for the last time. It all feels like there's a part where it feels like I'm just stuck there, and so that's always there. And that's the truth. I've learned in the past year, to hide it really well, master hider or whatever. It's not even a word, but, I've learned to do that, like mastered the hiding, but it's always there. And so sometimes it's very present, like it is right now with words and tears. And other times it appears as an exhaustion, just feeling tired, feeling like I don't really want to, like I'm just going through the motions, and so it's always there. So yeah, that's, the struggle part, the word struggle I picked, and I think I picked, what else did I pick? Confusion, struggle. And what was the last one? Shift. Yeah. And so the shift part would be related to the confusion. I think so the initial confusion was just a complete disorientation after he died, after the funeral, after, all of that, probably like 3 or 4 weeks after. And it was coming to terms with my own mortality, the mortality of everybody that I love. And then the confusion was like, what do I do with this information that is now facing me in my face? And it just felt completely disorienting. And it felt like I had nowhere to go for answers. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't see anyone even asking those questions, even people who were going through grief. And so I felt like I was losing my mind. And I still do, that part of me feels like is it just me? Am I just wired this way? What is it? Like, why is no one else really asking these questions? Why is no one sitting there stunned like I am about their own mortality and having some kind of reaction to it, and it's almost like, why aren't people panicking? Like, if we were to say today that there's, meteor or asteroid or whatever that's going to hit the earth and we're all going to die, right? There will be mass panic. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we're not all going to die at once, but we are dying. Where is the recognition of that, And so that drives me, like, it feels crazy sometimes that no one's really asking that question. And so I've had to sit with those questions. And I realized also that I can't, like, those answers or whatever the process is needs to come from within. Like, a packaged external answer isn't going to really relieve any of the discomfort. So I think that would be the confusion. And then there's been shifts that have come with that. I know that the grief has felt pretty constant, but there's been shifts that have happened around it.
I don't know if you can relate yet. Not having the cognitive energy and being able to focus really impacts the day-to-day life. And fortunate for me, I was introduced to Magic Mind. It is an elixir in a bottle for me. As soon as I take it, the brain fog's gone. And what is important, I'm able to take decisive action. Because it's one thing to think about it, it's another thing to talk about it, yet it's the action that gets it done. And that's what Magic Mind does for me. It gives me overall energy to be able to show up. So you, the listener, for the next 10 days, you are able to get 40% off your subscription. Yeah, 40%. Go to www.magicmind.co/lift. Make sure to use my discount code LIFT, LIFT. Again, magicmind.co/LIFT. You don't know what you need until you try it. So give yourself the gift of trying.
I'm just going to bring a grounding so that we can see if we're in our bodies. Because having to relive those memories and be here present can dysregulate us. And I don't think at times we take a moment to see where we are.
Yeah.
and just release and process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm constantly, as I'm speaking and as you are, I am holding myself gently in my body. Like I can feel my chest right now. I can feel my belly, and there's a tightness in the chest. There's this knot in the belly. And I'm speaking from there. I mean, it goes up into my head to formulate the words, but it's emanating from here. And so I'm aware, and you're probably sensing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different presence of what comes forward.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do my best to stay here.
Yeah. And that's why I'm just bringing back, because this is the whole, we're in very sacred space right now.
Yeah.
Very sacred space. And I want to honor that. And this isn't about rushing a system and where we all have the right answers and we're going to say the right thing. To engage with our vulnerability, it's messy. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we rush through it. Mm-hmm. And I want to honor this process for you and myself, and to shift the way that we can interact with these things.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, how is your engagement with reality? Because from my own experience, and when I felt ill, it was, you do the mindfulness courses and the inner work and all this. And if you listen to Buddhism, the text is like, reality is just as is. There's nothing wrong with reality. And which is true. Yet what happens is that our reality is constantly changing because of the impermanence. And to have to go into a new reality when you appreciated a reality that you were in, that takes a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of suffering in there. And I understand that there's sometimes these texts that, bypass a lot of things, or just want to act like, mind over matter and just get over it. So reality is just this, and just use your magic powers of mind, where it's like, I'm human and I'm going to suffer. This is difficult to go through this transition of continuously having to wake up to this new reality. Mm-hmm. Can you explain? I don't know if you can relate to what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what tools you've had to use in this year to continuously? Because I'll give some information to the listeners. You are a wife, a mother of 3 beautiful children. You are also a doctor in the field that's very heavy. The name is slipping me. I want to say endocrinologist, but it's not.
Hematology.
Hematology, sorry. And, with that hematology, you're always facing death also. There's always this high alert of helping your patients to have a better life while navigating with this grief. And so the grief, from my own perspective, always grabs onto reality. And then it's like, no, don't be in that, and don't keep moving forward or showing up in the way. And so I'm just asking you, what tools have you used in this year to see the reality as best as you could as is, mm-hmm. while honoring your humanity and showing up with all the responsibilities, mm-hmm. with the grief?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll probably start with like what reality is right now, or feels like for me. Because I don't think we're even taught to or learn how to even appreciate what is reality, let alone then deal with it. We just push through things without thinking, really, or reflecting. I would say not even thinking, but reflecting and letting it land. So the reality was, like, there's so many layers to this, right? But the reality continues to be that my father is dead, Um, there's difficult family dynamics around that, with my siblings. And there's grief around that. Our relationships have completely shifted with his death. So um, everyone's grieving in their own way. And my mother's a widow now, and she has to navigate, and I'm helping her as well. We're helping each other. And then my reality is like learning to live in a world where my dad is no longer there in the way that I have known for 40 plus years. It's like I don't even know what this is like. I've never had experienced it before. I mean, I have experienced death and I've seen it closely. But this isn't just about death. It's not the death part, it's the part of the living after that. It's the part of me here, kind of still standing, going, okay, I don't know how to, this is a new world now. It's like, it was shocking, continues to be, that it looks the same on the outside or similar, but it's not. It's like you're navigating it and every step is new. And that's just such a disorienting experience. Because you're like, what's going on here? It's almost like alternate reality. The things are the same, the physical things, are the same, but it's just, I'm in everything I interact with feels different, including myself, my job, even my kids and my husband. It's like, oh my gosh, what the hell's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to really, like, the first step, I think, was to acknowledge just how disorienting that was, because nothing felt familiar all of a sudden. Like navigating through airports didn't feel familiar, because usually I would, like, my dad would text and know what, so you must be here now or there now or whatever. Like he was usually checking in, and the rest of the family would know that he was checking in. So he would be their source of, like, information for how I was. And so there wasn't that, and all these other little details of, like, it just looks so different. And so every first encounter with whatever, that first just felt really different, because I had to orient with who I was now meeting this moment. And it was like, I don't even know who I am right now. Mm-hmm. And so there was very little ground under the feet to stand on, none, I would say. And yet, there's these things to do. I had to take the planes and airports and whatever to come back, and then I had to show up to work. And I remember the first meeting I had at work that I was sort of running. And I think it was the first day I got back, or maybe the second day. And it was meeting on Zoom, and we didn't have our cameras on even for that meeting. But I must have asked a question, because I was away for a while. Just again, for the listeners, I was away for like about 5 months, not working, away with my dad going through whatever he was, and then when he died. So I was coming back after almost 5 or 6 months of, like, being in this completely other space of attending to him being sick and all of that. And so stepping back into this, like, I had never gone through something like that, right? It wasn't like coming from mat leave. Even though coming from mat leave feels a little bit disorienting in the beginning, this felt completely like, whoa. And so I remember asking, do we still run these rounds the way that we used to, or has anything changed? And so someone on that call must have realized what I was feeling, or at least some of it. And so she sent a private message to me, and she said, "You got this." And it was simple, 3 words, "You got this." But there was just something so powerful about that it sort of snapped me out of, like, the that sort of stunned state of, what are we doing here? I was like, I got, yeah, and then I just started, and I knew it. It's like driving a car, but you sit there and you go, okay, I do know how to do this. Right. But it was those 3 words, and she probably, like, I've been meaning to feed that back to her, because it's been a year and I haven't, and she probably, I don't know if she remembers her, saying that even, but the impact of that on me was really big. And she wouldn't really know unless I told her. So I want to tell her, because we were on Zoom call without our videos on. Like, she can't really see me or anything. Yet she put that in the private message in the chat box. Mm-hmm. It was just such a, act of kindness. And so I remember there was like, in terms of what helped me through this, like, and continues to. So the first step was the acknowledgement. This is just utterly disorienting. I don't know what to do. And to sit in that and go, like, I remember sitting on the floor one day, just sobbing, crying, and saying, and I wrote a letter then, because I was writing out letters to my dad the first few months. And I said, I don't know how to navigate the world without you in it. I don't know how to do this. And I feel like I don't want to. Mm-hmm. So there was both of those, and I just sat there, and I don't know how long I cried for. And it was like, yeah, and I didn't get any immediate answers or replies or any, magical experience that I can package. Like, it was hard and messy. And so I did get up from that, and I felt a little bit lighter after, releasing, like, just acknowledging. It's like, okay, you're not spending energy in denial. And I don't know what to do. So I'm gonna, lean on whoever I can around me. So I leaned on my spouse a lot, to navigate, like, to make sure, like, our plane tickets and things, and, like, getting to places. Thankfully I had him. I would look at the kids and my mom, we just sort of held on to each other, as we fell and sort of circled together. Mm-hmm. And then as I started to get into work, the familiarity of the routines of certain things, so that familiarity, the routine that we normally hate and complain about, oh my God, same old, that same old was like, things that I could just hang on to, like the consistency. Okay, this is, so I was grateful for that, even though at times it was like, it felt like a struggle to even get into work. But at the same time, I was aware that I needed that. I needed to just have something to just do and kind of just sleep, wake up, something that gave me structure, that allowed me to have a routine of when I sleep, when I wake up, even though at times it felt like my biology wasn't really working with that routine. Mm-hmm. But I really appreciated the importance of, like, that routine, the necessity of some structure. So there was an appreciation of that. And then it's been an existential journey after that, and so for that part, well, even before I go to the existential part, I did, seek professional help, so therapy, about 3 months after he died, because at that point, it was like the trauma aspects of it were getting really, really intense. And they were coming as flashbacks, these intrusive thoughts and memories that were very overwhelming, very emotionally crippling, like painful. There was just such crippling emotional pain that I hadn't experienced before in, like, my life. Like, I've experienced different kinds of pain, but this was like an intense, emotionally crippling pain. So I did, go for therapy for that. And maybe we can talk about that in a bit. And then the sort of the overarching part was the existential questions. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And I must say that for me, I mean, I don't talk about this a lot or much, because I feel like, one, it's a bit private. Two, also just the the connotations that come up in people's mind, if I mention, that I'm a Muslim and, this is what I follow, but you know what, I'm going to just talk about it. Like that was a huge component for me, was just rediscovering, my relationship with God, and realizing that, that I was like, I had moments, phases where I was arguing with God and just going, just standing there like this, like a child arguing, going, I don't understand any of this. I don't know, like, why is there a world where we are born and then we all die? And that's like, that death feels like the worst thing ever. It doesn't feel pleasant. There's nothing about it that feels, people talk about these beautiful transitions. None of it felt beautiful to me. It was painful and messy. I didn't see any beauty in it. It's like, I don't get it. And it was like this sort of, almost like this debate and arguing of like, this design makes no sense to me. And just the realization that, what, this is the world. This is how the world is designed. And so some of that had started even when my dad was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, it was sort of futile, arguing against the design, because you know what, my arguments aren't going to change the design. And so then it was like, okay, then what is it that I'm really asking for here? And I realized what I was really asking for was for strength, and it was for guidance, and it was for relief of the pain. It was for ease, and it was for the wisdom to be able to, navigate this design that feels so confusing, but it's a reality. How the hell do I navigate this? And it's like, if you've created it, and this is just my belief set, I know with God, and I say, if you've created it and you've created us in it, you must have given us tools to navigate this. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but can you show me the way, And so I continue to do that, and there's a deep surrender in that came with time, like after the yelling and the screaming and the arguing and the debating internally, this like belligerent child. There was this like, it brought me to my knees literally. And as Muslims, like, we pray that when we pray, we do bow down, and then we go down on our knees and we prostrate. Like, there's a literal physical, on your knees on the ground with your head, your forehead touching the ground when you go down in prostration in front of God. So it's almost the deepest forms of surrender. And it was in those moments of surrender, the utter surrender of control, of the admittance, like almost like a confession, the admitting that I really have zero control over any of this, and I don't even know how to navigate this. And almost that, when I would have the deepest moments of those surrenders, and they got deeper with time, and sometimes they're less deep, more deep, and so on, but they were deeper than I had ever gone, before. Mm. It was in those moments, and this makes me emotional because it's a really there's few words for that experience. It was in that deep surrender that I felt held. It's almost like this hand of love came around me and underneath me, and I was no longer falling. I was held. And that I thought that in that deep surrender, I would just lose myself, that it was like a bottomless well. But there's this graceful, loving presence that held me and continues to hold me. And it's that. I can give you all the tools. I can tell you all these other things. But it was those moments that gave me the energy to keep going. And so that's what I returned to. I return to those. Our prayers are 5 times a day. I don't, I'm not always in that deep presence. Maybe I'm in it very little of the time, because I feel like, as humans, like the minute we get a little of that, we're pretty content. And then we go back into sort of the states of forgetting that need for that deep surrender, and almost like that illusion of, oh, I'm back in control. So, but the pain, the grief of missing my dad keeps me really close to that place of that surrender, and that in connection with God. Like, it isn't just a surrender. It's not a despair, or, in some ways it feels like it might be, or maybe despair is a door that opens to that, like I would be feeling utter hopelessness and despair before I entered into that surrender. Like it was almost like I needed to feel all of that to be able to be drawn to my knees in that way, But once I got there, and like I said, it wasn't like willfully. It was like screaming and yelling. But once I got there, it's like, okay, this constant, this is the constant that can keep me going. And everything else will change and does change, but I can keep coming back to this constant, and I get to do it in my faith 5 times a day. And so it's that utter and deep surrender. And that's what the word Islam means. It's sort of submission. And people talk about, oh, what is submission? They hate the word submission. We don't want to submit. We don't submit, And it's like, it's that submission and that connection, that continues to give me the strength to keep going and keep facing the fact that, I am going to die also. But if I've got this constant, that's holding me through this dimension. Mm-hmm. In coming back to that again and again and again, there's this conviction, this knowing, this hope, that connection will also be found in the other dimension. And if it can be found in the other dimension, then it really doesn't matter as much what else is out there, because this constant, this relationship is what will keep me going. And so that's really been, if I wanted to summarize the whole year and I didn't get to that in a day or two, it was like over the year, and I continue to still realize and figure that out more and more. But it was that, and I wouldn't have, in ways maybe I had substituted or not substituted, or maybe not known that I needed that as much, because I hadn't needed it in this way prior to my dad dying.
Look inside yourself. Can you see beyond your mind? Can you shed a light on the treasure that you are? Can you be at ease for a moment? Can you feel that peace and your soul in everything that you are? You already got all you need.
You explained it very beautifully, because some of this stuff is without words, and to connect into, feeling out of sorts, like you said, and then trying to grasp back into functioning. You explained it very, very well. And the pain, that you're not going to deny the pain, not bypass the pain. Like I say, grief is the other side of love that nobody ever talks about. There's no real preparation for it neither. It's like, like yesterday I was at a friend's house, and her daughter is pregnant, and she's trying to ask all about the labor and this and that. And it's like, I can share with you my experience, yet your experience is going to be your experience. Mm-hmm. Yet you have to know that you have the ability to go within and find those tools. Mm-hmm. And it in your explaining, it shows that your faith in a religion helped to navigate you through this. And it's really unfortunate that we have come to a space that we have to worry about what other people are going to perceive of us because of a faith or a ritual or a religion that we want to partake in.
Yeah.
In this year of reflection, what are your takeaway lessons?
My biggest one would be honesty, being honest with yourself. We sometimes, we have this incredible ability as human beings, I think, to delude ourselves and know that we're deluding ourselves. The first thing I would be is like, be honest about where you are right now. How are you feeling? What are you experiencing? And naming it and going, yeah, I feel this, or this is what my experience of life is. So that would be the biggest one. And the second one is, like I said, is I think it's really worth asking. Maybe the word worship sounds really intense, but what are you following? Because you're following something. Do you know what it is that you're following? And are you convinced? Have you thought through this for yourself? Or have you even been given the arguments? Because right now it's like people will regurgitate even the arguments of why they believe something, but even those arguments will be regurgitated. They've heard someone else say them. They've heard a particular podcast speaker, influential person, and TikToker, whatever. And they're just regurgitating the same information. It's like, have you actually have you thought about it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second one I would say is like, really, if you've had a circumstance in your life that has broken you open and stuff is coming out, that's your chance to, instead of trying to quickly close the door on that, because I feel like it's a window too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a window, and then that window does close after whatever event. So it's like, take the chance to ask yourself, why do you do things the way you do? And then to be honest about where you are right now. I think those would be my two main ones.
Is there anything you want to share with the listeners or anybody that may be listening and that is navigating with grief? Is there anything that you want to offer to them?
Yeah, I would say grief is a sacred experience in life that ultimately we all experience, some earlier, some later, some more, some less. And I think that in honoring your own grief, it will take you to places that you didn't even know existed. And so trusting your own journey, because the journey of grief is just done so differently by different people. And overall in not even just in Western culture, but in general, I think it's not something people want to discuss or talk about. Like it's almost like, okay, if people aren't discussing it, what the mind interprets is either they're over it, or at least that's what my mind would interpret, that it's not that big of a deal for them. That's why they're not talking about it, or that it's not, there isn't permission to talk about it. Those are the two interpretations that at least my mind would give. And it's like, well, maybe there's a third one, that people are going through this, but they're hiding it really well, or don't know how to talk about it, or maybe they do experience it differently. And it's like, so what if they do, I know for myself that I have experienced grief very deeply. And to the core. It's been the most disorienting, the most distressing, the most sort of shifting experience, and it continues to be. And so if someone who's listening to this is experiencing that as well, please don't see that as something flawed in you. If if you're feeling it that deeply, maybe you're awake to certain things that perhaps others may or may not be awake to, and to honor that.
Sorry, is there anything that you would like to add otherwise or speak on?
I just wanted to speak about the trauma part.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because I really think grief varies, and there's been a lot about grief out there. There's books now, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of resources. And they talk about this in almost all of them, because I listened, especially early on, like it was very important for me to understand, when I didn't have my own words, defined words, through the words of others who may have gone through experiences. I was looking for those sources, and almost all of them talk about experience, like the circumstances around the death. Mm-hmm. Like there's many factors that influence how we grieve. And one of them is how did that death occur of your loved one, or if you're grieving something else, I mean, grief doesn't always need to be the death of someone. There could be the ending of something else. The circumstances of that are very important. And so for me, the circumstances were experiencing the trauma, of seeing my dad go through this suffering, but also the trauma, because I've reflected on this quite a bit. The trauma was that I felt complicit. I felt complicit in his suffering. I felt like I was part of it. I felt like because I didn't stop it. It felt like I just stood there and I watched, and ICUs are, I mean, people, as a physician, people go to ICUs all the time. And it was the first time that I saw it this way from the other end. And it was prolonged, like it wasn't a few days, because maybe if it had been a few days, the effect would have been different. But 5 months of that, wow, like I feel like there's few things within the medical world that can be just so dehumanizing. And to stand there and I want to share an experience actually that recently happened to me. Mm-hmm. I was at the dentist, and I was doing getting my annual checkup done. And so part of that is doing the x-rays of the teeth or whatever. And so they put these, people are probably familiar, they put those little things in the mouth and then you kind of bite on it so they can then take the x-ray from the inside. And so that piece that she was putting in my mouth, like it, to go to the back molars, she had to push it back, and it made me gag a few times. And then even in holding it, like biting on it and feeling that at the back of my throat, because I have a sensitive throat, I felt like gagging the whole time. And it was a few seconds. It was the most unpleasant experience. And it immediately triggered for me when they intubated my dad. And I don't know if you've ever seen intubation, or if people have seen how intubations happen. They put a metallic thing down your throat, and then they insert this big tube that goes down into your throat, into your airway. And it was the hardest thing to be in the dental office and to know that trauma had been triggered. And then to have the dentist walk in, because this was the hygienist doing it. And then the dentist walked in, and she saw me, and I could see her face going, "Are you okay?" But she wanted to chat with me about, orthodontics and whatever, because I had asked about those. So she's sitting there explaining to me about Invisalign or whatever, and my trauma has been triggered, and I'm trying to breathe, and I'm trying to go nod my head and go, "Yeah, do you have any questions?" No. And I'm trying to like sound as normal as I can, right? And my system is like, oh my gosh, in extreme pain, triggered by the contact in my mouth, and bringing back all the memories of imagining what my dad might have felt if a few seconds of discomfort that I know I'm going to walk out of felt so horrible, how would that have been like for him? And not having any means of stopping it. Mm-hmm. He had no voice, had little energy in his body. Like it just, and so she was chatting with me, and then she left, and then the hygienist wanted to start working in my mouth and doing the cleaning and whatever. And this was a different hygienist than I usually would have. And so she started to, wanted to start and she didn't really know, she hadn't worked with me before. So I just realized at that point that I couldn't do this. And I stopped. I said, you know what? Would it be okay if we reschedule this and I could just have this done with my regular hygienist? I just don't have the energy in me to, like, it was unpleasant for me previously. And I don't have the capacity right now to experience that, with someone different. And she said, fair enough, and so I was able to ask for that and not suffer through it, and not worry about that I'm going to hurt her feelings. And so I just couldn't at that moment. My nervous system just didn't have the capacity. And so I walked out of the dental office, and this was just a couple of days ago. And it's I can walk home from there. So I was on my walk home. I just started sobbing and crying and shaking. And I sat on the bench. There's a park there. And I just sat on that bench and I cried with, like, it was loud. There's no one there, but I was sobbing loudly and crying. And I just felt like I kept saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And it was like I was saying that to my dad. And please forgive me for not stopping that. And I just felt so complicit. It's like we had never really discussed goals of care for him. So we didn't know what he wanted or not. And I mean, it wasn't my decision alone, but if people would be like, in retrospect, why did you let it go for 5 months? Well, when it was day by day evolving, you didn't see the 5 months, that's in retrospect. You saw him get a little bit better and there's hope. So maybe now he's going to come out, but then he would deteriorate again. And it was like, well, what were we doing though? We were hanging on to this hope, but at what cost? And at what suffering? And it's like, could I have done something to stop that earlier? Should I have done that? And just recognizing that at that point, I didn't have all that information. So it's like, when I'm asking him, sort of speaking it and going, can you forgive me? It's like, can I forgive myself? But I just, it's so unimaginable to me how, like, because we never got to talk, right? I don't know how his experience was. How the heck did he make it through his days? I don't know the answer to that, and maybe on the other side of it with the medications, they do get pain medications, they do get sedation. Maybe the experience didn't land the way I am imagining it to land. But from the little I know about how awful nose swabs feel in the back of the nose, or how awful, when somebody's poking you in the mouth, I'm like, oh my God, that must have been so horrific to have an NG tube stuffed down your nose, and he would pull it out and they would have to put it again. It's like, the height of suffering for me and not knowing. And then the part where he couldn't really do anything about it. So I had to deal with that. So I sat on the bench, and I sat there for probably a good 30 minutes. And I could see people from a distance, walking by. They probably saw me wiping my tears and sobbing. And I was like, whatever, And then how did I get out of that? It was by like starting to walk. I got up and I felt my feet on the ground, because I knew I was in I was reliving the trauma. Mm-hmm. And this had to come out though, because for a few months I hadn't had it, this experience had stopped for a few months. And I knew that it it didn't stop because it was over.
Yeah.
It had stopped because I had, like, part of me had just buried it and said, you know what, we've had enough of this. But something woke up that day that needed to come out. And so after that, I just felt my feet on the ground. And then I was in the park. So I felt the grass under my feet, and then I touched the leaves of a tree. I touched the tree, the bark. Like, it was that physical touch of these things that just brought me back into current moment, because I wanted to step, because I was going into the house and my kids were there and everything. And it's like, I wanted to go there grounded, because I didn't really want to chat about this too much with anybody. It's just, again, it's like, I say that, and I've just shared this story like publicly now,
but in the moment,
in that moment, it was like, I didn't think there was one I didn't think I had the energy to try to describe it in words. But I did kind of say to my husband that, because he asked me, he's like, oh, you're back early, or relatively early from the appointment. And I was like, yeah, I actually rescheduled because the hygienist wasn't there that I usually work with. But I found myself in that experience. Like, if I hadn't given myself permission to get up and leave that day, I probably would have held the hygienist responsible for that, the painful experience, and gone, ooh, that was just a horrible dental visit. And it was like, there's perception here because you were in a traumatic state right now, or traumatized state. So there was all of that. And so that has built over the past year. And that has built through professional help, like through therapy. So I just wanted to share that as well with listeners. I needed, sessions with a professional who could, and we used different techniques, and we went back to processed many of these experiences, is why I was able to do that for myself when it came up, without the presence of another human being there that was helping me ground. That didn't just come. So I think that's part is important to share too, because it's part and parcel. Sometimes we confuse it for grief, and it's like there's an overlap between both of them. They're like kind of a Venn diagram, but there's parts of this that are like, they're the trauma part. And then the grief is they overlap. But I think it's really important to recognize that as well, because there is help for that. You don't have to continue suffering like that. There is help for that part. The grief, and the sense of that loss, that continues. But for the trauma part, there is help for that. There is hope for that. And again, one last thing I would say is the intensity with which you suffer, the fire you burn in, it's not like the bigger the fire, the more you love that person. You can actually help find ways to put that fire out, and then focus on the grief part, because that will be big enough. It's like, you don't need to burn in this additional fire of the trauma. You can give yourself that help, that permission. And in fact, in allowing some of that trauma to heal, you're able to embrace your grief journey in a different way. And so that's been part of my shifts as well. So I wanted to share that rawness with everyone, because I've had a lot of moments of those in the past year.
Thank you. I also want to, direct the listeners in what you explained too about the trauma and the overwhelm, and, seeing your father and wondering what he was going through. Also, that overwhelm is a bit of a celebration that you actually advocated for yourself and you weren't complicit. Because usually sometimes when we're in a traumatic state, we negate our own needs and we go into a bit of people pleasing and just going with the flow and looking strong and not wanting to inconvenience somebody or whatever narrative there is. Yet you interrupted that and you advocated for yourself and recognize, I'm triggered and this is going to be more like, this isn't what I need right now.
Yeah.
So that overwhelm too is not only, wondering what your father suffered. There's a bit of overwhelm of like, I showed up in a way that I hadn't done for myself before.
Yeah.
And that's the work of, it's not about, you're not ever going to get triggered or you're never going to push the buttons of trigger.
not go through PTSD, because that was a bit that could be described as PTSD
Yeah.
of that, lighting up. Yet you've had the tools of recognizing you're triggered, recognizing this is going to enhance it, and this isn't what I need. And, allowing yourself to be with all those dense emotions.
Yeah.
And finding the grounding, the presence of what's right here, right now, to bring you back into reality.
Yeah.
And you walked, the listeners into what that would look like.
Yeah.
And it's no easy work.
No,
it sounds real easy. It's like, oh, that's like a simple. And it's like, yeah, it may be simple, but it is not easy.
No. And it was exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The biology of our nervous system, when it is ignited, it does a whole doozy on us, and it is very exhausting. And when we do the release, there requires some rest.
Yeah.
Because it took a whole load on you. Absolutely.
It's very energy consuming. And it's so connected with the whole body. And this was 2 days ago. Thankfully, it was the end of, a Friday. So I didn't have to work after that. And it was, coming into this long weekend. So, but there's definitely I'm aware of the effect of that,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, sharing that part with the listeners so they can hear the relatability, hear what a process looks like, and the tools to go into that. And you're still in real time with this. It's not like something that you did a year ago and I'm still living in this. This is still my truth that I'm processing through and trying to make sense of it while I'm, going through the experiences. So thank you for that. It's really an honor that you would share that with the listeners. I just want to let you know how much of an amazing human being you are, how loved you are. And, I'm very honored that you shared your time and your truth and your vulnerability on this podcast and with myself and the listeners. And, thank you for showing up for yourself and speaking what you needed to speak out. So, thank you for being you, Ghazala.
Thank you for this opportunity and, for being part of it, for being part of this journey. And I hope that, sending this thoughts and prayers to anyone who might be listening, because if they're listening to this and they've got through till the end, there's suffering there probably. So just extending that connection to whoever might be listening to this and whenever they might be listening to this, because once it's out there, it'll find people in the time in at the right timing. So I'm just grateful to be able to share that all.
I appreciate that. Is there anywhere where the listeners can find you?
Ooh, good question. I'm on Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and I go by my name. So Ghazala Radwi. Yeah. So they can find me there.
Remember to be kind to yourself.
Thank you.
You don't need to try so hard. Realize you're right where you need to be.
Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I know that this was a really sensitive topic for many, so I value your time and your energy of being able to navigate through this discussion. It is my intention to bring awareness and acknowledgement to topics so that we can begin the change and start to evolve. So if you found anything of value in this conversation, please share it out. Share it to your friends, your family, your coworkers. Share it on your social media platforms. You can find us on all social media platforms under Lift Oneself. And you also can go to the website, www.liftoneself.com. Remember, be kind and gentle with yourself. You matter.